The crop duster roared across the sky at the exact time the old man had predicted. At 76 years old, he no longer relied on luck or faith, just precision. The scope of his rifle held steady, supported by a mount fixed to the back of his old Jeep. The two men standing in front of the cabin were on guard, but they didn't move like soldiers. And for someone who'd spent half his life spotting the difference between discipline and improvisation, that meant everything. Through the lens, he caught one of them resting his rifle on his shoulder, easing the weight like he wasn't expecting anything to happen. The other looked more alert, but still distracted enough not to notice the fatal alignment forming between them. The veteran checked his watch again, the worn leather strap tight around his wrist. 8 seconds until the flyover. His finger touched the trigger, but didn't press. Not yet. The sound of the plane swallowed the valley. The grass rippled under the pressure of the air. And then, the shot. Clean, dry, perfect. A single crack, masked by the engine's roar. Two bodies dropped almost simultaneously. No reaction, no warning, no pain. And the mountain remained silent. 5 minutes before that shot, the old man had been finishing his coffee from a metal mug, watching the horizon through the morning mist. His breath came out in soft white puffs, and despite his age, his hands didn't shake. The rifle, a custom precision model he had built himself, was already mounted on a rotating base welded onto his rebuilt military Jeep. This was his ritual. Climb to the highest point of the land, scan the field for at least an hour, and then choose a direction. But that morning, the glint of metal near the cabin, the posture of the two men, the tension in their shoulders, it all triggered alarms he couldn't ignore. He adjusted the scope, measured the distance, checked the wind. When he realized the crop duster would pass overhead in less than 10 seconds, he knew the moment had arrived. This wasn't a hunt. It wasn't training. This was real. The shot had been surgical, but he knew that was only the beginning. Wasting no time, the veteran picked up the shell casing with a swift, practiced move and turned the ignition with confidence. The engine growled low as he maneuvered the tight path down the dirt trail. He knew he had only minutes before the men inside the cabin realized the sentries were gone. And if they were trained, which he doubted, maybe they'd respond quickly. But if they were like most kidnappers, hiding behind big guns and fake bravery, they'd only have time to panic. The Jeep pushed forward through roots and low branches, rifle on the passenger seat, his eyes locked in with the focus of a man who'd stepped back in time. The road was rough, but familiar. He'd driven through worse in missions no one ever spoke of. But this time, there was no radio, no command, no orders, just instinct. And one clear objective: save that child. The sound of tires crunching gravel mixed with the fading hum of the crop duster in the distance. The Jeep stopped a few yards from the cabin, hidden beneath thick trees and natural shadows cast by the terrain. He stepped out cautiously, rifle in hand, his footsteps light and silent. He could hear muffled laughter from inside, a few threatening voices, and the unmistakable sound of a poorly tuned radio. No alarms, no shouts, no sense of alert. The two bodies were still lying where they'd fallen. The plan had worked. No one had heard the shot, and that gave him a precious advantage. The old man took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and felt that old chill run down his spine. It wasn't fear. It was memory. The exact feeling that came right before combat, when the world slowed down and every second became a decision. If you're into stories about real heroes, men and women who lead with quiet strength and genuine courage, help us out by subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. And while you're at it, leave us a comment with your honest feedback or suggestions. That really helps us keep making better videos. Let's keep going. He moved through the trees with the calm of someone who knew the weight of silence. Every step was part of a choreography rehearsed over decades. The terrain sloped down, covered in damp leaves, and the air smelled strongly of pine resin. The rifle was now strapped to his back, secured by a worn leather sling across his chest. In his hands, he carried a lightweight, silent pistol, only used when the distance left no room for error. Up ahead, the cabin was starting to come into view. Weathered wood, windows covered in newspaper, and a makeshift antenna on the roof. But it was the shadow that passed near the side door that triggered his alert. There were at least 3 more men inside. The veteran knew he didn't have much time. At any moment, one of them could step out, spot the fallen guards, and turn the rescue into a disaster. He circled around to the back, near an old generator that buzzed with erratic noise, another sound he could use to his advantage. As he moved closer, something stirred deep in his chest. It wasn't anxiety. It was purpose. The same feeling he'd had during his first rescue operation more than 40 years ago, back when the commander's voice still echoed through the radio, when orders were cold and impersonal, but the mission always felt personal. He'd learned that behind every kidnapped face, there was always a story. And here, in this cabin, was a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, taken straight from her father's arms. A man who, according to rumors the old man had caught over the radio days before, was one of the most powerful figures in the country. Someone who moved pieces too big to be protected by ordinary bodyguards. And yet, with all the wealth in the world, his daughter's life now rested in the hands of an old man hidden among the pines, with deep lines on his face and scars no one could see. Reaching the side of the cabin, he crouched behind a pile of rusted barrels. The nearest window was cracked open. Inside, he could make out part of the room. Maps spread across a table, a flashlight hanging from the ceiling, a military-style backpack that looked recently used. One man sat with headphones on, scrolling through his phone. Another talked loudly, distracted, flipping a knife between his fingers. And a third, farther in the back, stood near the girl, facing away, but clearly in control, acting like someone who thought nothing could go wrong. The distance was too close for the rifle, but perfect for close-quarters precision. The old man closed his eyes for a moment. He calculated the steps, the angles, the timing, and then he moved. The back door creaked open just enough, masked by the irregular hum of the coughing generator. The first man never saw it coming. He was taken down from behind, silent, knocked out with a precise blow to the neck. The second didn't have time to react before he was subdued. The knife slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a muffled clink. That left just one, the one guarding the girl. The veteran knew this was the moment everything hinged on. One wrong move, and it could all fall apart. But he also knew something the kidnappers didn't. In that space, at that distance, in that exact environment, he was unstoppable. But the third man heard the faint sound of a body dropping and spun around too fast. With a predator's reflex, he yanked the girl close, using her as a shield. The veteran froze. The child's eyes were wide with fear. The man shouted erratically, searching for the threat. The old man slowly raised his hands like he was surrendering. Then he spoke, low, steady. Not to provoke, just enough to distract. Just enough for the girl to instinctively duck. That's all it took. What happened next was so fast no one could have described it clearly. A sharp sound, a barely visible motion, and the man dropped. The girl stood still for a second, then bolted toward the old man, who caught her in his arms and wrapped her in his thick coat. There was no drama, no glory, just steadiness, just humanity. But what the veteran didn't know, not yet, was that someone else was making their way down the dirt road, and that the time he thought he had under control was about to throw a brand new variable into the mix. The roar of an engine tearing through the silence was the first thing that made him look up, low, deep, and coming from the east, where an old service road cut through the land and stretched out to the edge of the property. It wasn't the kind of sound you expected to hear in a remote place like this, especially not at that hour. With the girl still clinging to his waist, the veteran moved quickly, guiding her behind an old cabinet leaned against the wall, and whispered for her to stay quiet. Then he returned to the back door, his eyes sweeping the terrain with the precision of a radar. It was a dark pickup truck, speeding down the dirt trail like it was late. It didn't look like law enforcement, and that was exactly the problem. The cabin was cleared, but the situation was far from over. The old man knew he'd have to act again, fast, sharp, and now at the disadvantage of not knowing how many more were coming. He rushed over to one of the bodies and grabbed a handheld radio. It was still tuned to an open channel. The static crackled between distant voices. Arriving at the location in 2 minutes. No response from the guys at the door. Probably just a radio issue. Don't care. We're checking now. Time was shrinking fast. The veteran knew he couldn't defend the cabin with the girl still inside. What he needed was cover and distraction. And he had an idea. He opened one of the side windows, positioned his old rifle on the wooden ledge, and aimed it toward the trail. Next to him, he placed the radio near the microphone of an improvised PA system he found in the cabin, probably used by the kidnappers to make threats or issue instructions. He turned the device on, let the static fill the room, and then, carrying the girl in his arms, he ran toward the back of the cabin, slipping out through the same door he'd entered minutes earlier. A secondary trail descended behind the structure and crossed a line of stones that led to a rock formation. From there, he could observe without being seen and think. At the top of the formation, he hid behind a wide boulder and placed the girl safely beside him, wrapped in his own coat. He pulled out a portable scope and scanned the road. The pickup had stopped in front of the cabin. 4 men stepped out. 2 had rifles drawn. The other 2 began scanning the perimeter. The sound of the radio still playing inside threw off their awareness just long enough for the veteran to watch, assess, and decide. One of them moved toward the front entrance. Another circled around back. The other 2 remained near the truck. He'd have to act fast again. But now, the environment was different. More open, more unpredictable. The first shot hit the one stepping through the front door. The second, seconds later, dropped the one heading up the back steps. The remaining 2 heard the muffled reports and reacted, but not the way they should have. One fired blindly. The other ran in the wrong direction. The old man used the chaos to slip through the underbrush, weaving through the terrain like in his operational days. Once they were far enough apart, he used the element of surprise once more. No yelling, no running, just a calculated approach. Steady, controlled, unforgiving. And he took them down with 2 precise moves. No gunfire needed. Silence returned. Everything. Except the sound of the girl's quickened breathing as he returned to get her. She was still shaking, but her eyes now showed something different. Trust. As if, for the first time since being taken, she knew she was going home. The old man picked her up and carried her through the rocks, but when they reached the jeep, they saw headlights in the distance, and it wasn't the police chopper. Not yet. A lone vehicle, coming from the western trail, was cutting through the gathering dusk. Someone else was headed to that place, and fast. And that was exactly what the old man feared most. When a situation looks like it's under control, that's when it demands the most attention. The tires of the approaching vehicle tore through the dirt trail like blades scraping stone. The headlights cut through the trees, flickering against the leaves and briefly illuminating the veteran's jeep in stuttering flashes. The girl was already buckled inside, secured with a makeshift seatbelt, tucked under blankets and gear. She stared at him wide-eyed but didn't say a word. She knew this wasn't a moment for sound. The veteran, on the other hand, kept his breathing steady, hands firm on the wheel, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, waiting for the exact second he'd need to act again. That vehicle wasn't from law enforcement. No markings, no muted sirens, just a civilian pickup, but modified, with high suspension and military-grade tires. He'd seen that kind before, in places where the government couldn't reach, but money could. The truck stopped just a few meters from the cabin. A single man stepped out, alone, unhurried. The old man studied him through the rifle's scope, adjusting the focus slowly. The way he moved told a story. This wasn't someone looking for the kidnappers. He was tracing the footsteps of whoever had taken them down. Dress shirt, subtle tactical vest, earpiece in his left ear. Not a common criminal, someone with access. Maybe not directly involved in the kidnapping, but definitely aware of the value of sensitive information. And seeing the overturned cabin, the missing guards, the marks on the ground, and 3 abandoned vehicles, it didn't take much to piece things together. The veteran lowered the rifle. He wasn't going to shoot. This was no longer a mission. This was judgment. He got into the jeep and turned the key. The engine responded with a low, steady growl. Before taking off, he looked at the girl once more. She now gripped the seat tightly, her eyes locked on his, as if silently saying, "I trust you." That was enough. He shifted into gear and drove down the trail with purpose, not rushing, but without a hint of doubt. He passed just a few feet from the man in the vest. The stranger turned toward the jeep. The old man didn't look away. They locked eyes for 2 full seconds, long enough for both to understand something that needed no words. This place was no longer theirs. It had already been cleared. There was nothing left to find. At the evacuation point, near the main road, helicopter lights sliced through the dusk. Medical teams, federal agents, and private security swarmed the entrance to a clearing that, just days before, had been nothing more than weeds and silence. As soon as the jeep stopped, a team rushed toward it. A medic opened the door and gently lifted the girl out. The veteran simply nodded. No explanation needed. The girl was alive. The mission was over. But it's when missions end that the questions begin. A man in a suit approached, distinguished, discreet, but carrying the posture of someone who speaks on behalf of someone far more powerful. He thanked him, praised him, and finally offered money, recognition, a place among what he called the new heroes of the nation. The old man looked at him for a few seconds, then extended his hand, not to accept, but to return something. A spent shell casing, the same one from the shot 2 kilometers out. "Keep this," he said. "It's all I want to take from here." The man pressed on. He spoke of financial rewards, public gratitude, lifetime protection. But the veteran just crossed his arms and replied with a single sentence, "My duty's not for sale." Then he turned away, walked back to his jeep like the dust rising under his boots was just another piece of who he'd always been. From inside the ambulance, the girl looked back one last time, and even surrounded by professionals, she smiled. A small smile, but real. And in that moment, nothing else needed to be said. What no one expected was what came next. The following morning, when newspapers hit the streets with headlines about the mysterious sniper who saved a billionaire's daughter, the front page showed no face, just a spent shell resting on a rock, and a caption, "Protected by someone who doesn't need to be seen." The city buzzed. The country speculated, but no one had answers. The man who'd fired the most precise shot of the decade had vanished. Once again. The dirt trail no longer held any sign of tire tracks. The wind of the following morning had swept them away, as if trying to preserve the mystery. On the radio of a local farmer's pickup, the reporter's voice narrated the news with a kind of excitement that didn't match the gravity of what had happened. Authorities have yet to confirm the identity of the marksman responsible for the miraculous rescue of magnate Albert C. Winslow's daughter. The recovered shell casing is expected to be auctioned to benefit veterans organizations, according to sources close to the family. But the hero remains anonymous. As the broadcast echoed through the speakers, the old jeep climbed yet another hill far from there, as if trying to outrun even the applause it never asked for. The veteran drove with a calm that bordered on silence. There was no celebration, no sense of relief, just the quiet weight of a duty fulfilled. He stopped at a worn-down gas station, filled up without saying a word, paid in cash, and returned to his vehicle. The attendant, a young kid, noticed the faded sticker on the windshield, the emblem of a military division. He looked at the old man with respect but didn't speak. The veteran simply returned the glance with a slight nod and drove away. It was always like that. He came and went, leaving behind only what truly mattered: safety, silence, and unspoken gratitude. Days later, an anonymous letter arrived at the veteran's home. Handwritten in a child's handwriting, it read, "Thank you for not yelling. I knew someone would come. Daddy told me there are good men who protect even when nobody sees. Now I know it's true." He read the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it inside an envelope stored in a wooden box on top of the closet, alongside others he never showed, medals he never hung, and photos of brothers whose names he no longer said out loud. That was all he needed. That was what the world would never see, but what he carried within. Back in the city, the stories multiplied. Some said he was a former intelligence agent. Others claimed he'd been trained by international forces. There were even whispers that he was nothing more than a myth, a cover for some top-secret government operation. But the truth was much simpler. He was a man with a rifle, enough time to wait for the right moment, and the courage not to hesitate when everything depended on a single shot. A man who didn't need applause to act, and who refused any reward, because what he carried on his shoulders was worth more than any offer. In the same field where it all began, weeks later, another crop duster flew overhead. And down below, a shadow moved between the trees. It was him, same coat, same rifle, same jeep, maybe looking for game, maybe just looking for peace. but always watching. Because for some men, duty doesn't retire, it just changes location. If you're into stories of true heroes, men and women who inspire through quiet strength and real courage, help support the channel by hitting the subscribe button and dropping a like. Your comments are always welcome, whether it's praise, constructive criticism, or ideas for improvement. It really helps us grow with each new video. And now, go ahead and check out the next one on your screen. You don't want to miss it.